The Chippewa Valley has always been industrious and forward-thinking. This is how it survived after the end of the logging boom. The diverse number of industries that started after the logging era allowed the area to not just survive, but thrive and even become quite important during peace and wartime. For those of us who grew up in the area, I think we take for granted all the Chippewa Valley offers now and what our forward-thinking founders established in the early days. Chippewa Falls had tobacco growers and cigar makers. We had beet farmers and a sugar beet factory. We grew grain and had very fresh water sources for our breweries. Yes, we had more than one. Lots of trees in the area were great for the furniture makers. Pickles were grown and sold to the pickle factory. I love how our farmers and natural resources were able to be used, processed, and turned into a usable product all locally. We even harnessed the power of the river to create hydroelectricity in 1927 by building the NSP Dam. Thankfully, the dam helps keep the city from flooding like it used to as well. In more recent history, we can't talk about all of Chippewa Falls Industries without mentioning it being the home of the supercomputer. Having such a variety of industry would prove useful, not just locally, but on a national and even international level. Many Chippewa Valley companies and factories received contracts from the Civil War to present day. One thing Chippewa was known for nationally, thanks to all the logging, was boots and shoes. Chippewa Shoe Company was incorporated in 1901 by John B. Petrowski and John Andrzejewski. They were known around town as the Johns. They obviously got their start with making boots for loggers, but not long after incorporation, they were contacted by the government for footwear for soldiers. Because of all the contracts they received, they needed more space than their Spring Street location allowed. In 1910, they purchased the Revere House property on the corner of River and Bay Streets for $3,200, and the adjoining property, where the Muley Livery was, for $1,800. They built a 3-story factory with a basement on this location. Chippewa Shoe held contracts during both World War I and World War II to supply specialized military footwear. During World War II, they produced cold-weather Arctic boots for the U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division that were worn during the Battle of the Bulge by infantrymen in the Ardennes Forest. Special boots were made for the airmen in the 1960s who flew U-2 spy planes. They had a steel plate in the sole to protect from ground-to-air penetration. Later, the company developed high-altitude flight boots for the U.S. Air Force during the Cold War. Mason Shoe also made combat boots, but soldiers would have to purchase their own. During wartime, officers' shoes were produced using better leather and were a bit dressier, but still to military specifications. A little background for those of you who don't know about Mason Shoe. Burton August Mason started Mason Shoe in 1904 when they purchased the Handmade Shoe Company. They purchased the Harshman Shoe Building in 1914 that was located 1 block away. In 1922, they put out their first salesman's catalog. By 1930, they had thousands of salesmen traveling the country. The company also unionized in the 1930s and was represented by the local 268 of the Boot and Shoe Workers of America. Even as the company was expanding in the 1950s, they relied on direct sales. They continued growing and expanding thanks to their hardworking salesmen. They had multiple locations around town for their offices, stores, and factories. By the late 50s and 60s, they were producing over 1,000 pairs of shoes a day. In 1968, they moved to the industrial park off of First Avenue, where they built a more modern complex. By the 1980s, they'd switched almost totally to mail orders. Even into the 90s and later, their numerous catalogs were shipped out and people could mail or phone in their orders. There was always a store downtown for locals to shop at as well. Part of it filled with work boots and other parts containing any other kind of shoe you can think of. A company that got its start making strong boots for loggers and working men and has continued in current times. Women were always employed at Mason Shoe, but usually in the office. During wartime, they took on more roles, with 50% of their factory workers being women. They worked in all aspects of the business, including order taking, finishing, and shipping. Mason Companies has always been community-minded and continues to support local missions and organizations. A couple cool facts is that Chippewa Falls is the only location of a brick-and-mortar Mason Shoe store. And this photo that was used in the opening of the 1980s hit TV show called Cheers was taken at one of August Mason's logging camps. The Chippewa Glove Factory opened in 1905 at 10 West Spring Street, and it seems they moved locations several times. They eventually occupied a floor in the Weinberg Shoe Building in 1910 to be able to hire more staff to keep up with the demand. This is the big building that was once surrounded by High and Central Streets with Duncan Creek on a third side. They were awarded several military contracts for the Army and Navy, each requiring different styles for different purposes. Being able to keep up with the demand in the early days was difficult because of the scarcity of tanned leather. The tanners went on strike, and the company had to put out ads asking for tanned hides from the locals. By 1931, they'd received 5 military contracts. In 1940, the U.S. War Department awarded the company a contract for the manufacture of 90,000 pairs of heavy leather gloves. The value was $94,000. They provided gloves for military personnel on stateside military bases and soldiers around the world. Most of us don't think of tobacco as essential, but it is during wartime. Tobacco farms have supported war efforts by producing a key commodity for soldiers and helping keep up morale of the troops. Mostly grown by farmers in Wisconsin and North Carolina, with increasing production during the Civil War. The U.S. government classified tobacco as essential for troops during World War I. It might not offer direct assistance, such as boots, clothing, or weapons, but keeping up the morale of troops is of utmost importance. After the South's secession, the demand for tobacco in the North increased, with farmers in states like Wisconsin seeing a boom in their crops to meet this demand. Easy access to fresh, locally grown tobacco explains why we had 5 cigar makers in town in 1926. Companies like the American Tobacco Company, led by Civil War veteran Buck Duke, capitalized on increased demand, growing with the industry and supporting the economy during this period. A.H. Jasper made an Irvine Park cigar that was all the rage in 1910. Even O. Henry was selling them at the Sioux Line Depot, and Conrad Berthen was selling them at the Elks Club in 1926. You could get a great Chippewa cigar almost anywhere in town. Located nearby on the border of Eau Claire and Lake Hallie, you will find a company that began as Northwestern Steel and Ironworks. This pressure cooker maker was a major regional government contractor. In 1939, the company was renamed to Presto. When the company began as a pressure canner maker, it supplied 80% of the country. Originally, they only made items for commercial use, but eventually switched to smaller pressure cookers and canners for use at home. Due to government restrictions on aluminum for domestic use, the company shifted production to military items. Contracts included the manufacture of aerial bombs, artillery, and rocket fuses during both World War II and the Vietnam War. These items were stored right behind the building. T. Warren shared these photos he took last year of the ammo storage area behind Presto. These are awesome to see, but I am not sure the area is open to the public, so definitely enter at your own risk. Not only did Presto help directly with these items sent off to battlefields, but they told folks at home it was their patriotic duty to can their food. With all the local victory gardens, it was important to grow, harvest, and preserve food, especially to get through the cold winter months in the Chippewa Valley. Here's a photo of plant employees from 1943. When you zoom in, Presto received the Army-Navy E Award for its production excellence, the first company in Wisconsin to be so recognized. Gillette Safety Tire Company was opened in 1917 by Raymond B. Gillette and had 250 employees. The large tire plant in neighboring Eau Claire drew its many employees from Chippewa Falls and surrounding areas. In 1931, a large portion of the company was bought by U.S. Rubber, who allowed the workers to unionize in 1935, becoming United Rubber Local 19. The company completely acquired the plant in 1940. Within 2 years of the new acquisition, the plant was converted into the government-owned Eau Claire Ordnance Plant in May of 1942, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. It took 3 months to switch the factory over from making tires to making munitions. It held federal contracts to produce 50 caliber machine gun ammunition and 60 million rounds of 30 caliber. At this time, the company was made up of 6,200 employees. 61% of them were women. After meeting the need for small arms ammo, U.S. Rubber purchased it back, and it converted back to producing heavy service tires for military vehicles, airplanes, and amphibious craft. After purchasing back the plant, U.S. Rubber made huge updates and investments to make this the most modern in its time. In 1943, they received the Army's E Award for Excellence in Production. It wasn't until 1967 that the plant was purchased by Uniroyal, which is the name most of us probably know it by. These awesome old industrial buildings have seen a lot, and there are so many stories surrounding them. Yes, there were tunnels underneath. No, you can't access them. Many were closed off or destroyed due to safety concerns. Don't let that get you down. All the ghost sightings I've heard about have happened above ground. In a future episode, we'll revisit the history and lore of the buildings and include some first-hand stories of ghostly encounters from some locals. Moving on, we have another large industrial complex that was torn down in 1988. The Chippewa Woolen Mill actually got its start on the south side of town, in what used to be called Frenchtown. In 1882, James Mitchell opened the mill there and operated it with George Wolfe until it was destroyed by the Big Flood of 1884. They were not about to rebuild on the banks of the Chippewa River and chanced this happening again. Hector McRae decided to build an industrial building on the bank of Duncan Creek that year, right across the creek from Leinenkugel's brewery. They moved any machinery that survived and was still in working order to this new location. For a short period of time, the Chippewa Falls Woolen and Linen Mill Company operated there, but struggled to procure stock. After being closed for a while, the building was leased in 1890 by J. L. Pierce and B. F. Millard, who called it Crystal Spring Mill. After just 1 year, the French Lumber Company purchased it and ran it until 1905, when Joseph Mondelaire, co-owner of the lumber company, passed away. The company was transferred to heirs who incorporated as the Mondelaire Mercantile and ran it for 60 years. Once again, a local industry relied on the locals. The local woolen mill sourced its wool locally, taking the raw wool and turning it into the final saleable product, each step occurring in-house with no outsourcing to other companies. Very unique. Over the years, the mill received multiple government contracts. They produced U.S. Army blankets and other wool products, including khaki fabric for uniforms, especially during World War I and World War II. The mill, which operated from 1882 to 1962, was known for its strong local economic impact and its production of a wide variety of woolen goods for both civilians and the military. Another family-owned company located inside our industrious city is W.S. Darley. They began in 1908 in Chicago, making firefighting equipment. Mr. Darley, the company founder, hired a man by the name of Yates, who was a Chippewa Falls native. Mr. Yates insisted they moved to Chippewa Falls, so they did in 1934. The company became known nationally for the pumps for fire engines. Production amped up during World War II when they were putting out 45 pumps a day. In 1944, the Rivoli Theater was packed with Darley friends and representatives, military brass, and others who wanted to see W.S. Darley awarded the E for Excellence Award during wartime. It was said that fire was a big concern, especially given the use of incendiary bombs. Darley ramped up production to meet and exceed the need. Their various types of pumps are being used internationally now. How many of you have heard of Rex Systems? Rex Systems opened in 1973 in Chippewa Falls and has a long history with the U.S. government. They continue to receive numerous government contracts for building and testing a multitude of items used by the Defense Department. These ongoing contracts can include items like military electronic components and assemblies, assemblies to repair and maintain short and long-range radar, gun and missile fire control radar, submarine sonar, fathometers, signal data processors, tactical communication radios, and more. This makes me think of another well-known supercomputer guy that most of us have heard of, Seymour Cray of Cray Research. Seymour Cray Jr. is the international father of the supercomputer. He's a pretty big deal in these parts, and was even on the cover of Fortune magazine in the 1960s. It is said that he even had some groupies in the 1980s. In his field and in his community, Seymour was a rock star. Let me share some info and stories with you that barely scratches the surface of all this man and his company did. He was a true genius. Seymour Cray Jr. was born in Chippewa Falls in 1925. His dad was the city engineer at the time of his birth and was involved in the building of the NSP Dam. When Seymour graduated from high school in 1944, he joined the Army. His intelligence was soon recognized and he became a code breaker in the European and Pacific theaters during World War II. Seymour went to college on the GI Bill when he got home and graduated from U of M in 1950 with a Bachelor of Science in Electronics. The following year, he'd earned a doctorate in applied mathematics. His first job was in St. Paul at Electronic Research Associates. By the 1970s, he was working at a company he started, Control Data in Minnesota. Feeling stifled by administrative work, he decided to move back to Chippewa and start a new company. Control Data actually even helped him build a new lab here. He also took a few engineers to get the company started. By 1975, Seymour had his first computer available, the infamous Cray 1. When Seymour was stuck on a problem, he liked to go ground himself and get his fingers in the dirt of the Northwoods. Literally. He was known for digging tunnels under his home, where he claimed to meet with elves in the Wisconsin woods. Locals say what he dug was more of a cave that he used for storage. But the elf story is much more interesting. Mr. Cray took the truth to his grave with him. Have you ever heard of a little town called Los Alamos? It's the home of the Manhattan Project and the creation of the atomic bomb. While that project predates Cray computers, they did purchase a Cray 1 in 1976 for what we assume is national security purposes. So did the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in Palo Alto. Both of these installations specialize in national security, so we can only assume it is for that purpose. In 1989, Cray was in a feud with the Department of Defense, who wasn't allowing certain countries to purchase Cray computers. Cray had become important to national security. Some of their systems could be used to design nuclear and other weapons, as well as electronic spying. It was a huge ordeal and involved many committees pushing a decision back and forth on whether it was safe to export these computers to other countries or not. Countries of concern that were specifically mentioned are Japan, India, Israel, Brazil, and West Germany. NASA was excited to get their hands on some Cray technology as well. In the 1980s, they bought a Cray 2. In the 90s, they bought a Cray T3D and T3E. And in 2001, they purchased an SV1EX. These computers were mainly for Langley, Ames, and Jet Propulsion labs. They were used for simulation, climate models, and spacecraft navigation. Another thing to note is the importance of women at Cray Research. Women ran the wires in the supercomputers due to their smaller hands and dexterity. What you probably didn't know was that Cray sold a supercomputer to Saudi Arabia. When the computer was having issues and needed to be fixed, they wouldn't allow women to come fix the computers. The king temporarily declared the building housing the computer a separate country. That allowed the women to be welcomed with open arms to fix the computer, and the king dissolved the country immediately after. True and fascinating story.